since September 6th of 2011. She has a BA in business, a BA in anthropology, an MA in anthropology, and a PhD in physical anthropology, all from Michigan State University. Dr. Nelson's research interests lie in ethnic differences in skeletal health, bone mass, and body decomposition in growth and development, and osteoporosis. I hope I got that right. Dr. Nelson has had a number of faculty appointments, both at graduate and postgraduate level, including at Michigan State, Wayne State, and Case Western Reserve University. Dr. Nelson has been a lead and committee member for doctoral students in diverse academic disciplines such as anthropology, biomedical engineering, biomedical sciences, and medicine, including at the University of Witwatersrand in South Africa. Dr. Nelson has had a series of professional appointments, including as a senior research assistant at Henry Ford Hospital, as a consultant for Department of Veteran Affairs Medical Center, and as interim assistant vice president for research at Wayne State University. Dr. Nelson has had a series of honors and awards, including but not limited to Excellence in Teaching Citation at Michigan State University and Minority Access to Research Careers Award. Dr. Nelson has also had a series of consulting and review at the National Institute of Health, National Science Foundation, the Journal of Women's Health, and the Annals of Internal Medicine. Dr. Nelson has published extensively in peer-reviewed journals, including American Antiquity and American Journal of Physical Anthropology. Dr. Nelson has also had a couple of series of grants, including a $1.5 million grant from National Institute of Health as a co-investigator, and a $2.9 million grant from
Hello, and thank you for inviting me. I'm really excited to talk to you tonight. I don't get to interact much with students. I gather that there are a lot of disciplines represented here, so just so I get an idea, but don't go around one by one, how many of you are from STEM fields? And how many from liberal arts, social sciences? Okay, let's see, education, health sciences, nursing, medicine, engineering, we've already covered the STEM, but okay. And a lot of disciplines in the college. Science, humanities. Okay, so we have a nice large range. What I did was I answered the questions that George sent to me in a PowerPoint. I used his same setup and I provided my answers so that they could be talking points. And I'm happy to talk off the slides if you'd like me to enlarge upon other topics. I added a couple slides as well. Just as a little bit more to my background, I am trained as a physical anthropologist in the human skeleton. That was my focus. And I was hired into Henry Ford Hospital to do clinical research and oversee their bone density program in the clinic. So I suddenly got into the clinical realm. Then I went to Wayne State and became a professor of internal medicine, which is unusual for a PhD in social sciences. But I did a lot of work in osteoporosis and other aspects of bone health. I wandered into how bone and cancer interact, and all of my focus was typically on ethnic differences, population differences in some ways, sometimes men and women, sometimes ethnic, sometimes looking at how children are different in their bone health from adults. So that was my focus. And then I came here in 2011, as my introduction said, as the Vice Provost for Research, and I'm also a professor of anthropology here. So I've had kind of an interesting career pathway, not one I expected or really prepared for. And I'm delighted to be here tonight. I'm glad there is a range of disciplines represented. So if you don't mind, I'm going to sit down because my feet tend to get sore. But we'll go through the slides, and please stop me if you want to talk more about things. So the first question George posed was, what are the best funding sources? There really isn't the best funding sources. It depends on your discipline. So in the STEM fields, for example, federal funding is really the gold standard, and I think it's expected for promotion and tenure in many places. pharmaceutical companies for clinical research, not just clinical trials, but I've also had funding from pharmaceutical companies to do clinical research that wasn't in the form of an intervention with a drug or device, which I don't do. I'm not a clinical physician, nurse. And are sponsors of a lot of applied research in our school of engineering and computing. Next question, what are some funding sources for trainees? And this was sort of an add-on question because the National Research Council of the National Academies has recently sent out a notification that they are accepting applications for
just for the name. In other words, if I can get Albert Einstein on my team, he might not necessarily carry the heaviest part of the load, but his name is on there, so they're going to think, well, if he's on it.
That happens, and yeah, they're not gonna carry the heaviest part of the load. But my experience has been that these very well-known people love a great idea, and they love to help young investigators break in. And it's an easy couple of papers for them, let's be honest, you know? So, honestly, no one's ever turned me down, and I never expect them to do the biggest job on the grant, but they've always been there when I've needed them to look over my analysis of the data in their field. They're great. Or write the, you know, the important literature section of the article, because they know it.
Yes, just one follow-up question. So could you tell us a little bit more about how the funding that you have, if I want to apply for a faculty position, how does the funding that I have acquired over the years play with the possibility of me being accepted for the job? Is there any relationship between the funding I have attracted, the possibility of getting a job offer?
I think it's in a little bit later slide if you want to wait a few minutes, and then if we haven't covered it enough, we can do more. Also, many of the sponsors, especially NSF, want to know how any of this applies to waiver issues. The impact statement often is required, and they're serious about it. So, as I've said, we're all passionate about some area that we want to investigate, but they're not going to give you $1 million unless they think this is going to go somewhere. So, how can you relate your interest to some broader impact? And it would be nice if you could relate it to more than one discipline in your impact statement. So is it going to affect the economy? Is it going to affect future science? Is it going to affect communities? Whatever you can apply it to in a broader scope can be really compelling to a funding agency. So how long does it take to get funding? My first thought is way more time than you think. So be patient and plan for that, because it's going to take a long time. Let's start at the point at which you've submitted a proposal, and then we'll work back. So if you submit a proposal to the main funding agencies, it's typically not going to get reviewed for 5 or 6 months. Not even going to get reviewed. And then it goes to some other level where a funding decision is made. So this can go on for 9 months easily after you've submitted a proposal. So now let's back up. How long does it take to get a proposal ready to submit? I personally think a seasoned researcher can get a proposal ready to go in within a few months. And I mean a really seasoned researcher. But if you're new at this, I'd give myself at the very least 6 months and maybe the better part of a year to get your first proposal. So when you look at the time frame there, plus the fact that usually you don't get funded on your first application, so then you go through the whole 6 to 9 months again. So if you really need to be funded in order for XYZ to happen, whether it's get an academic tenure track job or whether it's getting promoted or tenured, formulation of an idea to, okay, you've got your fund. It's gonna take a long time. What's involved in proposal writing? Blood, sweat, and tears. A lot of them. First, you have to identify the problem that you want to seek funding for. This can take a while. This could be handed to you by a senior person, and that happens, and that's great. That's a great situation. For my dissertation, I sat and went through years of the American Journal of Physical Anthropology till I hit on something that I thought was really interesting and hadn't been done in a different population, and that's how I started my career of always looking in other populations. So there are different ways to find the problem that needs to be answered, but you have to do that. That's an incredibly important first step. Then you have to think, how would I approach this, and how is this going to be innovative, novel, compelling? You're going to have to sell this to the reviewer. It's always helpful to consult with someone at the sponsor or the agency. So if you're going to a federal agency, call the project officer whose name is going to be on the funding announcement or the program, it's a recurring program. Tell them what you're thinking about doing, and they'll talk to you. They'll talk to you, and they'll tell you what you might want to think about. And sometimes they'll say, why don't you give me, a couple of pages, I'll look at it, I'll talk to my colleagues, I'll get back to you, and they'll help you kind of get through the first phases of this. So don't be afraid to make those calls. There's no downside to it. Take time to really think about what you want to do and plan it. Don't just jump off the bridge and hope you'll be okay. Take your time, do your homework, formulate the problem, review the literature, make your plan, make sure it's doable, identify any gaps. Assemble a team. I've already talked about this. It doesn't all have to be senior people, but a team is important. Most disciplines, it's not true about all, but most disciplines do not have the tradition of a single investigator. Some do. Those are different. But in disciplines where a team is important, be careful about assembling your team and that can take time. That's the other thing. Team building takes time. It's always good to ask others to critique your proposal when you're at a near final draft. Don't ask them every time you have a new draft because you're going to exhaust them. So get to a point where you think you're almost ready, and then see if somebody will critique it for you. Here in Oakland, I started up an initiative for people seeking federal funding of at least $150,000 a year in direct costs, that if they can get me their draft proposal 6 weeks before the deadline, I will find a reviewer. I'll pay a modest stipend to the reviewer to review the proposal using the criteria that the sponsor requires. And the people who've taken advantage of this, it's been 5 or 6 months so far, have really gotten a lot out of it. And interestingly, it's not just the proposer, it's not just the proposal writer, but the critiquer, the reviewer, has loved this because they're trying their skills as a reviewer, they're learning about their colleagues' work, and it's a really nice intellectual exercise. But even if there's no such formal program where you are, you can always find someone and ask them if they'll look at a final draft of your proposal. The nuts and bolts of a good proposal are to follow the required application format precisely. Do not wander from it. Sometimes there's a font size, a margin size, a page limit. Always there's a page limit. Follow it to a T. Some sponsors won't even look at it if they see you use the wrong font. So there goes 6 months of your life. So follow the application format precisely. Imagine yourself a reviewer. You've got 12 budget and its justification are really, really important. A lot of people make the mistake of lowballing what they're gonna need. The astute reviewer knows that you're either doing that hoping you'll get funded, but you're never gonna get the project done, or that you just don't know. And the worst of the two is that the reviewer thinks you just don't know. So put in a reasonable, justifiable budget. And also I've found it really helpful on both sides, the reviewer side and the investigator side, to build your timeline. And you can do that early on, because it'll help you see if what you're suggesting is doable. So do your timeline, you can do it in a chart form, however your brain works, but do a timeline and see how many months do I need for each of these things that I say I'm gonna do, and can I do it in the 3 years or the 5 years? Is it doable? Can I really do this? And I always built in the first 3 months for organizational activities, and then I would list what those might be. And don't be afraid to do that. Again, it shows the reviewer that you know you're not gonna start day one with data collection. You might have to buy your equipment, you know, so, it's helpful even at the very beginning to keep a timeline for yourself, and as you change your proposed project, change your timeline and see if you can still do it. Oftentimes a critique will say this is an overly ambitious project. If you've planned it out, you'll see that, and then you can pare it down accordingly. So what's involved in proposal writing continued? Remember, the reviewers are busy people. They may not know as much about your field as you do, so be sure you build in some